all you ever wanted to know about adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. Adenosine triphosphate, ATP, just so you have some background information on it, your body needs energy to run all of its cells, and your body cannot directly use food for energy. The energy you can use in the food, you eat it, and it's stored inside of chemical bonds in between elements and molecules. So, to convert this energy that's stored in those chemical bonds into a form that your body can actually use directly, those bonds have to be broken and then new bonds formed. Once that energy is converted into a more usable form, ATP carries it to be used for cell functions. So, ATP is an energy carrying molecule that carries and stores energy for cell functions. It's like the main energy currency, if you will, exchange system for your cells. As far as the structure goes of ATP, it has a nitrogenous base. So this guy right here, adenine, he's the base of the overall molecule. And then it's attached to this 5-carbon sugar called ribose. And then it has 3 phosphate groups at the end. So here's my phosphorus, phosphorus, phosphorus. These red ones are oxygens, and they're hanging off of this sugar. ATP goes through a ATP to ADP cycle. So there's a lot of energy that's stored between those last 2 phosphates. So between this group right here, there's a lot of energy stored within those bonds. So energy is released when a phosphate group is removed. And then sometimes something else is added. So if I were to take this and remove it, energy is released for cellular processes, and we're down to a DP, diphosphate, instead of triphosphate. Tri meaning 3, di meaning 2. Then this phosphate group can reattach itself, and so phosphate is then added, and the cycle can start all over again. Now, the cycle doesn't just happen, this creation of a molecule that makes and carries energy, the cell just sitting there. It's a chemiosmotic process. Chemiosmosis is a little bit beyond the scope of the course. It's the movement of these hydrogen ions or protons across a semi-permeable membrane that is bound inside of the cell structure membrane of the mitochondria, and it moves down an proton hydrogen ion concentration gradient to form this. But what you have to know is that chemiosmosis is movement of ions, positively charged particles, if you will, down a concentration gradient. Okay, so enzyme ATP synthase is used to add the 3rd phosphate to the ADP group. So there's a special molecule that is used to add that 3rd phosphate group, and that takes it from a DP to a TP, and using energy in the form of the food that you eat. So we start off with our ATP, our triphosphate group, and then one of the phosphate groups is removed. Then we have ADP, the diphosphate group. This is where energy is added from broken down food. So this phosphate group is added back in to the molecule, creating ATP once again. So we have energy released for the cell process, and then energy added. Energy released is so the cells can do stuff, and the energy that's added, we're getting that from the food that we eat. So I know this is a little complicated, but let's just summarize what we've said. When ATP is broken down, it releases energy for the cell to use and becomes a DP, and then a phosphate group is added, making it once again a TP. So ATP is essentially broken down to form ADP, this phosphate group, and it releases energy. So because more energy is given off than is really required in this overall reaction, this is exothermic. So the breaking of ATP to ADP is exothermic. Okay, and this is when it gets used, right? It gets used by the cells for cell stuff. All right, when we make ATP, cells must kind of join together their ADP molecule and a phosphate group, and we're going to use energy. Energy is required from food to make this happen. So we take our ADP and we add a phosphate group, and then of course energy, all of which we gotten from food, to assemble that triphosphate once again. So because energy is taken in, it takes a lot of energy to attach that third phosphate group. This overall reaction is endothermic. So it's important to note that ATP is formed in this way during cellular respiration, which we'll learn more about later, but cellular respiration is how we form ATP. And so where do we get this energy from our food again? And that is these carbon-based molecules in your food, right? So remember those macromolecules that we talked about? The carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids and proteins. Well, nucleic acids, that's only in DNA. We don't get calories from that. But carbohydrates are most commonly broken down for ATP. And that's because you can get 36 ATP molecules from one glucose molecule. It's a pretty good bang for your buck. Fats, lipids, those can be broken down only after the carbohydrates are used. And then your body's least likely to use proteins because, remember, we need those proteins to build other things. So we get a lot of the stuff to make ATP from carbohydrates that we eat.